He was stabbed, poisoned, shot, and drowned, yet he wouldn't die. Some called him a healer, others, the devil in disguise. But who was Rasputin really? A mystic? A monster? Or something even darker? In this journey through history's most forbidden corridors, we'll uncover chilling truths the Russian Empire tried to erase, and the terrifying prophecies Rasputin left behind. Just be warned, some legacies refuse to stay buried. Born in the frozen wastelands of Siberia in 1869, Grigori Rasputin didn't enter the world, he disturbed it. His family were poor peasants living in the remote village of Pokrovskoye, a place where wolves outnumbered people, and the darkness of winter never truly lifted. Even as an infant, rumors swirled. Villagers said animals acted strangely around him. Horses bucked, dogs whimpered, and cats refused to enter the home. His baptism was said to have turned the holy water cloudy. As he grew, so did the mystery. Rasputin suffered strange seizures, claimed to see visions of the Virgin Mary, and often wandered into the forests alone for days. When he returned, he spoke of angels and demons. At age 12, he reportedly survived a rabid wolf attack that killed 2 hunters, emerging without wounds. His injuries, if any, healed overnight. Was it luck, fabrication, or something beyond explanation? The villagers whispered, "He's not right." In a region ruled by cold, hunger, and superstition, Rasputin wasn't feared because he was evil, but because they couldn't explain him. By his teenage years, Rasputin's strangeness was impossible to ignore. He was restless, unpredictable, and obsessed with the unseen. Some villagers believed him blessed, others whispered he was cursed. His nervous tics, sudden outbursts, and long trances only added fuel to the fire. Rasputin's behavior walked the line between holy man and criminal. He stole horses, brawled in taverns, and fell in with questionable company. Yet every time the law closed in, he slipped away, untouched. His companions faced punishment and exile. He remained. When he was finally drawn to the monastery of St. Nicholas, he found a world that seemed to match his restless soul. There, he encountered ascetics who starved and whipped themselves in search of purity. They believed sin had to be embraced before it could be destroyed. Rasputin was enthralled. He abandoned his wife and children to wander Siberia as a pilgrim, seeking God in suffering. Shackles on his ankles, barefoot through snow, he learned to endure pain and call it holy. To the faithful, he was a man of God. To skeptics, he was a madman lost in obsession. But one thing was clear: Rasputin was no longer just a peasant. He had transformed into something else entirely, a wandering prophet who blurred the line between vision and delusion. And soon, his path would lead him directly into the heart of Imperial Russia. By the early 1900s, whispers of Rasputin's gifts had spread far beyond Siberia. His reputation as a wandering holy man, equal parts terrifying and magnetic, began to attract pilgrims, nobles, and even church leaders. In 1903, he arrived in St. Petersburg, a city of glittering palaces, restless revolutionaries, and a court desperate for miracles. At first glance, Rasputin was an unlikely savior. Tall, gaunt, and disheveled, he smelled of sweat and travel, his piercing eyes unsettling even the most hardened clergy. Yet, when he spoke, something happened. His voice seemed to draw listeners into a trance, his gaze impossible to break. Introduced to influential priests, Rasputin stunned them with his apparent ability to heal and to see into the future. Word of the strange Siberian spread quickly, and soon the whispers reached the royal palace. For Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra, Rasputin seemed heaven-sent. Their only son, Alexei, suffered from hemophilia, a deadly disease that doctors could not cure. When Rasputin prayed over the boy, the bleeding stopped. To the desperate Tsarina, it was a miracle. From that moment, Rasputin became more than a mystic. He was the royal family's secret weapon, the man who could soothe their son, their fears, and perhaps even their empire. But with his sudden rise came suspicion. The court, the clergy, and the nobility wondered, who was this filthy peasant, and how had he bewitched the Tsar and Tsarina? Whether prophet or pretender, Rasputin had gained something far more dangerous than visions. He had the ear of the throne itself. The Tsarina believed Rasputin was chosen by God to protect her fragile son. But was it truly divine power or something else entirely? Whenever Alexei's bleeding worsened, Rasputin was summoned. He would pray, place his hands on the boy, and speak in hushed tones. Hours later, the bleeding would stop. To Alexandra, it was nothing short of miraculous. But skeptics had another explanation. Modern historians suggest that Rasputin may have saved Alexei not with prayer, but with knowledge. Doctors of the era often gave the boy aspirin, unaware it worsened his condition by thinning the blood. Rasputin insisted on no medicine, perhaps unknowingly preventing disaster. Still, his methods were unnerving. Witnesses described him locking eyes with Alexei, his piercing stare leaving the boy strangely calm. Was it hypnosis, a form of suggestion, or a power no one could explain? Whatever the truth, Rasputin's influence over the royal family grew with each miracle. The Tsarina became convinced that only he could keep her son alive. And with that belief, Rasputin gained access to the most private chambers of the Russian Empire. To his enemies, it was unthinkable. A dirty Siberian peasant dictating the fate of a dynasty. And yet, Alexandra clung to him with a faith so absolute that rumors of scandal, corruption, and even sorcery could not sever their bond. But as his power grew, so too did his appetites. Rasputin's name would soon be tied not only to miracles, but to debauchery, lust, and fear. With every passing year, Rasputin's shadow loomed larger over the Russian Empire. His reputation as a healer and holy man clashed violently with whispers of corruption, lust, and unholy indulgence. In the gilded halls of St. Petersburg, rumors spread like wildfire. Women of the aristocracy were said to fall under his hypnotic gaze, convinced that intimacy with Rasputin could cleanse their sins. He preached a twisted theology that one must sin deeply in order to feel God's forgiveness fully. To some, it was salvation. To others, it was blasphemy. Eyewitnesses reported secret gatherings where wealthy women abandoned husbands and titles to follow Rasputin into prayer sessions that blurred into ritualistic intimacy. His name became synonymous with scandal, the mad monk who seduced Russia's nobility. Even the Tsarina was not spared from gossip. Though no proof of an affair has ever been confirmed, her unwavering devotion to Rasputin only fueled the fire. Newspapers caricatured him as a demonic puppet master, controlling the throne through Alexandra's blind faith. For his enemies, Rasputin was no longer just a threat. He was poison, corrupting the empire from within. But Rasputin himself seemed untouchable. He flaunted his excesses openly, drinking heavily, staggering through the streets, and yet returning to the palace with the authority of a saint. Police reports documented his frequent visits to bathhouses, where he was said to whip prostitutes to drive the sin out of them before engaging in his own indulgences. The contradictions only deepened the mystery. Was Rasputin a hypocrite exploiting faith for flesh, or a mystic who believed his darkness was part of God's design? One thing was undeniable: his enemies were growing, and soon they would stop whispering and start plotting. Behind the velvet curtains of St. Petersburg, the whispers grew louder. Rasputin was no longer just a scandal, he was a threat. In the cathedrals, priests muttered that he was a false prophet, a heretic cloaked in wolf's skin. They claimed his miracles were not gifts from heaven, but tricks born of hell. To the church, he was living proof that the devil had found his way into the palace. In the drawing rooms of the nobility, his name was spoken with venom. How had this barefoot peasant, this wandering drunk, taken command of the Tsarina's heart? Every gesture, every whisper from Rasputin was seen as a corruption of the royal bloodline itself. For aristocrats who had ruled Russia for centuries, it was humiliation. And in the shadows, the Okhrana, the Tsar's secret police, recorded everything. Their dossiers read like horror novels: drunken nights in brothels, half-naked women chanting prayers, nobles collapsing into trances under his stare. They photographed him staggering through alleys, scribbled testimonies from servants, compiled pages of filth. Yet nothing worked. Every time they moved to expose him, Rasputin only returned stronger. It was as if scandal itself only fed his legend. By 1914, the city was electric with conspiracy. Was Rasputin a monk or a spy, a prophet or a puppet master? Some swore he worked for Germany. Others claimed he was part of a hidden sect manipulating the crown. One thing united them all: Rasputin could not be allowed to live. In candlelit rooms over glasses of poisoned wine, aristocrats and generals began to plot his downfall, and from that moment forward, Rasputin's life became a countdown. Rasputin's enemies struck again and again, but each time he lived. And with every failed attempt, his legend of immortality grew. In 1914, a disfigured woman named Kionia Guseva confronted him in the street. Armed with a dagger, she stabbed him in the stomach, slicing his body open so deeply that his entrails spilled out. Rasputin collapsed, bleeding to death. Or so it seemed. Against all odds, he survived, recovering in a hospital bed, while newspapers proclaimed that even blades could not kill the mad monk. The failed murder attempt only fueled his reputation. But all agreed on one point: Rasputin refused to die. This was not the only attempt. Priests tried to castrate him. Aristocrats tried to humiliate him. Secret police tracked his movements, convinced that eventually someone would finish the job. Yet, time after time, Rasputin returned, scarred, staggering, but alive. It was said he predicted his own death, warning that if he were killed by peasants, the Romanovs would endure. But if noblemen took his life, the dynasty itself would fall. His prophecy would hang like a curse over the empire. To those who plotted his end, these words were not just superstition, they were a challenge. Rasputin had become more than a man. He was a symbol of everything broken in Russia: decadence, corruption, and unholy influence. And so, the conspirators sharpened their resolve. Rasputin had cheated death once, but they would make certain the next attempt would be his last. Beyond his reputation for sin and survival, Rasputin carried something even more unsettling: prophecy. He often claimed to see the future, and disturbingly, some of his visions appeared to come true. He warned of environmental disasters decades before they were recorded, predicting strange shifts in the climate and pollution that would poison the land. He spoke of world wars that would drown Europe in blood, foretellings eerily close to the chaos that erupted only years later. But his most chilling prophecy was personal. Rasputin predicted his own death. He sealed those words in a letter sent to Tsar Nicholas in Alexandria, ensuring they would see it. When it surfaced later, after his death, it seemed less like a prophecy and more like a curse fulfilled. Because just months after Rasputin's murder, the Romanov dynasty crumbled under the weight of revolution. To believers, Rasputin was not merely a mystic. He was a prophet whose words shaped destiny. To skeptics, it was coincidence, twisted into legend by desperate minds. Either way, his predictions became part of his immortality. They were proof, some said, that Rasputin had glimpsed forces far beyond human understanding. December 1916. Moika Palace. Snow pressed against the windows, muffling the city outside, as a secret gathering unfolded in the basement halls. Prince Felix Yusupov and his fellow conspirators had prepared a ritual disguised as murder. Their target was no ordinary man, but something they believed was unnatural, a force wearing human flesh. Rasputin entered, gaunt and unblinking, his piercing eyes sweeping the room. He was offered cakes and wine, both poisoned with enough cyanide to kill several men. He ate, he drank, and yet, nothing. His heartbeat remained steady. His grin widened. To the horrified conspirators, it was as if the poison had no claim over his body. Panic set in. Yusupov fetched a revolver, raised it, and fired. Rasputin fell in a heap, his body motionless. Relief washed over the assassins. They whispered prayers, convinced the nightmare was over. But when Yusupov returned moments later, Rasputin's eyes snapped open. They glowed with a feral intensity. He rose, staggering but unstoppable, and clawed his way toward the door. More bullets tore through his body, blood staining the snow as he collapsed in the courtyard. Yet still he crawled. Still he breathed. Still he defied death. Witnesses swore his face twisted with rage, his eyes burning with something unearthly. Finally, they bound him in chains and dragged him to the frozen Neva River. His body was hurled into the icy water. When it was recovered days later, investigators claimed his lungs contained water, meaning Rasputin was still alive as the ice swallowed him whole. To his killers, it felt less like they had executed a man and more like they had exorcised a demon. Rasputin's death was not just an ending, it was a curse. Within months, the Romanovs were swept away by revolution, fulfilling his own prophecy, that if noble blood spilled his, the dynasty would fall. And so it did. In death, Rasputin became larger than life. Historians call him a charlatan, a drunk, a peasant who stumbled into power. Others insist he was a prophet, a healer who held secrets that science still struggles to explain. Between the archives of police reports, the diaries of priests, and the whispers of aristocrats, one truth remains constant. Rasputin was a man who should not have mattered, yet somehow changed the fate of an empire. Was he merely a skilled manipulator, exploiting superstition at the twilight of a dying dynasty? Or was he something darker, a vessel of forces beyond human understanding, surviving poison, bullets, and blades until the river itself swallowed him? His prophecy of the Romanovs' destruction came true with terrifying precision. His influence spread like a sickness through the highest ranks of Russia, and even a century later, his eyes still stare back from photographs, cold, unblinking, alive with something that refuses to fade. Perhaps that is Rasputin's greatest legacy, not his miracles, his scandals, or even his death, but the question he left behind. A question that refuses to be buried, haunting history like a shadow that stretches beyond the grave. Was Grigori Rasputin truly just a man, a myth, or a monster? Or was he something far worse?